My husband stole my smart home patents for his mistress, so I hard-coded his downfall. My name is ELEANOR. I have always been fascinated by the invisible architecture that governs our daily lives. While my peers in engineering school were obsessed with building faster cars or sleeker smartphones, if our stories moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us build a stronger community every single day. My mind was fixated on the concept of the living, breathing home. I wanted to design residential spaces that anticipated human needs, seamlessly blending cutting-edge artificial intelligence with high-end luxury interior design. After spending my 20s working grueling hours for dismissive tech conglomerates, I pooled every cent of my savings to launch my own independent firm, Sentient Spaces. The early years were a brutal gauntlet of instant ramen, rejected loan applications, and sleepless nights writing thousands of lines of code. But my relentless dedication eventually paid off. By my early 30s, Sentient Spaces was the premier luxury smart home integration firm on the West Coast, designing automated mansions for Silicon Valley billionaires and Hollywood elite. I had built a sterling reputation and a highly profitable empire from the ground up. It was during this era of rapid expansion that I met Julian. He was a charismatic, razor-sharp corporate attorney specializing in intellectual property rights. We crossed paths at a charity gala in San Francisco, and his sheer confidence immediately drew me in. Julian was incredibly articulate, wore bespoke Italian suits, and possessed a deep understanding of the complex legal frameworks that terrified most engineers. We fell in love quickly, swept up in a whirlwind romance of late-night dinners and spontaneous weekend trips to Napa Valley. When we married a year later, merging our lives and careers felt like the ultimate strategic partnership. I was the visionary creator, the introverted genius who thrived behind glowing monitors and drafting tables. Julian stepped into the role of Chief Legal Officer for Sentient Spaces. I gladly handed him the administrative reins, allowing him to manage our vendor contracts, negotiate with demanding clients, and oversee the trademark filings for my expanding portfolio of inventions. For the first 3 years of our marriage, our dynamic functioned like a well-oiled machine. Sentient Spaces grew from a regional boutique firm into a national powerhouse. I was working exhausting 80-hour weeks, personally coding the framework for my absolute masterpiece, the Genesis Protocol. Genesis was a revolutionary, predictive artificial intelligence system designed to learn a homeowner's biometric rhythms. It adjusted lighting, temperature, security, and ambient sound based on heart rate, vocal stress, and sleep patterns. It was decades ahead of anything on the commercial market, a piece of technology that major tech giants would pay hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire. I poured my soul into the prototype, fueled by a dangerous mixture of espresso and ambition. Julian constantly assured me that he was securing the ironclad patents and copyright protections necessary to shield Genesis from corporate poachers. I trusted him with my life's work, oblivious to the fact that he was quietly setting the stage to steal it. The first subtle fractures in our perfect marriage began to appear just as the Genesis protocol reached its final beta testing phase. Julian started taking frequent, unexplained business trips to Seattle, claiming he was negotiating a massive installation contract with a luxury real estate developer. He became fiercely protective of his phone, changing his passcodes and taking hushed calls in the garage. His mood shifted drastically. The charming, supportive husband was replaced by a tense, irritable stranger who snapped at me over minor inconveniences. Whenever I asked to review the final patent filings for Genesis, he would launch into complex, dizzying legal jargon, ultimately assuring me that the paperwork was tangled up in standard bureaucratic delays at the Federal Patent Office. Because I was entirely consumed by the grueling process of fixing software bugs in the beta code, I chose to believe him. I wanted peace in my home, so I ignored the blaring alarm bells ringing in my intuition. The devastating truth unraveled on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Julian had rushed out of the house for a golf game, accidentally leaving his heavy leather briefcase sitting on the kitchen island. I needed a spare charging cable, so I casually unzipped the front pocket of his bag. Instead of a charger, my fingers brushed against a secondary, prepaid smartphone, a burner device. My heart sank to my stomach. With trembling hands, I powered the device on. It wasn't locked. The screen illuminated, revealing a long, highly detailed text thread with a contact simply named V. The messages were not just evidence of a sordid, illicit affair. They were a documented chronicle of a massive corporate heist. V was Victoria Vance, the ruthless CEO of Apex Innovations, my largest and most aggressive corporate rival. The messages detailed romantic hotel reservations, undeniable declarations of love, and most horrifyingly, a meticulous timeline for the theft of the Genesis protocol. I sat on the cold kitchen floor, the burner phone heavy in my hands, unable to catch my breath. The text messages laid out a conspiracy so cold-blooded it defied logic. Over the past 8 months, Julian and Victoria had been orchestrating a legal labyrinth designed to strip me of my intellectual property. Julian, acting as my legal proxy, had deliberately sabotaged my official patent applications. Instead of registering the core algorithms of Genesis under Sentient Spaces, he had secretly funneled the proprietary source code through a series of offshore shell companies. He was in the final stages of legally transferring the exclusive ownership of my masterpiece directly to Apex Innovations. In exchange, Victoria was giving him a massive equity stake in her company, a seat on her board of directors, and a promise of marriage once he divorced me and left me bankrupt. My husband was handing my multi-million-dollar legacy to his mistress as a romantic offering. The betrayal was a physical blow, a sharp, suffocating pain that radiated through my chest. For hours I remained paralyzed on the floor, drowning in a toxic sea of grief, humiliation, and disbelief. The man I loved had viewed my grueling labor and brilliant mind as nothing more than a resource to be harvested. My initial instinct was to scream, to confront him the moment he walked through the door, and to burn his expensive suits on the front lawn. But the analytical engineering side of my brain quickly overrode my shattered heart. If I confronted Julian now, he would immediately realize his cover was blown. He would expedite the final legal transfers, lock me out of my own corporate accounts, and use his extensive legal expertise to tie me up in years of agonizing, expensive litigation. In the cutthroat tech industry, whoever gets the product to market first wins the war. I needed a strategy that bypassed the slow, grinding gears of the legal system. I needed to execute him digitally. I carefully wiped my fingerprints off the burner phone, placed it exactly where I had found it in his briefcase, and stood up. I washed my face, splashed cold water on my burning eyes, and locked my grief away in a dark, inaccessible vault in my mind. When Julian returned home that evening, smelling faintly of expensive perfume rather than the golf course, I greeted him with a warm smile and a kiss on the cheek. I served him dinner, asked about his day, and played the role of the devoted, oblivious wife with terrifying precision. The next morning, the second his car pulled out of the driveway, I initiated my counteroffensive. I drove to a secure, anonymous coffee shop on the edge of the city, connected to a virtual private network, and reached out to a former colleague named Marcus. Marcus was a brilliant, highly ethical cybersecurity expert who owed me a massive favor from our early startup days. Marcus and I met in a dimly lit, noisy diner far from the tech district. I slid a heavily encrypted flash drive across the table, detailing the backdoor legal structures Julian had used to funnel my code to Apex Innovations. Marcus reviewed the data, his expression grim. He's legally insulated himself, ELEANOR, Marcus explained, tracing the shell companies, because you signed the blanket power of attorney giving him control over the intellectual property filings. Fighting this in a traditional courtroom will take a decade. Apex Innovations is scheduled to unveil their revolutionary new smart home system next month at the Global Tech Expo. Once they launch it, the market share is theirs. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, feeling a cold, unrelenting fire burning in my chest. I don't want to fight them in a courtroom, Marcus. I am the architect of that code. They stole the engine, but they don't understand how it runs. I want you to help me build a Trojan horse. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked with manic, obsessive intensity. I continued going to the Sentient Spaces office, maintaining the illusion that I was blissfully finalizing the Genesis protocol for our own eventual launch. Julian grew increasingly smug, clearly believing he was days away from pulling off the perfect crime. What he didn't know was that I had accessed the offshore server where he was storing the stolen source code for Victoria. I didn't delete the code. Doing so would have alerted them instantly. Instead, I meticulously injected a highly sophisticated, deeply hidden payload directly into the foundational architecture of the software. I designed a digital kill switch, a dormant piece of programming masked as a standard security patch. Because Victoria's engineering team lacked my intimate understanding of the complex biometric algorithms, they blindly accepted the updated code compilation, assuming Julian had simply provided them with the final, polished version of the software. They willingly swallowed the poison. The payload I designed was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. It was programmed to remain entirely dormant during all of Apex Innovations' internal beta testing and quality assurance checks. It would only activate upon receiving a specific, highly encrypted remote command from my personal terminal. Once triggered, the payload would bypass all administrative firewalls and aggressively seize control of the local network running the software. I didn't just want to break their system, I wanted to weaponize it against them. Meanwhile, Julian began his final exit strategy. He came to me in the living room, wearing a mask of deep, fake concern. "Eleanor, you've been working yourself into the ground," he said smoothly. "The code is finished. I've booked you a 2-week retreat at a silent meditation spa in Sedona. I want you to go off the grid, relax, and let me handle the final server migrations." He was trying to sideline me during the exact window of the Global Tech Expo. I pretended to be deeply moved by his thoughtful gesture. I packed my bags, kissed him goodbye, and boarded a flight to Arizona. But the moment I landed in Phoenix, I rented a car and drove straight to a secure, private hotel suite I had booked under an assumed name. I transformed the suite into a command center, setting up multiple encrypted monitors and establishing a secure link with Marcus. The Global Tech Expo in Las Vegas was the most important event in the industry, covered by hundreds of international tech journalists and venture capitalists. Victoria Vance had rented the largest, most expensive presentation hall in the convention center to unveil her proprietary new AI system. Julian was there by her side, hiding in the VIP wings, preparing to watch his mistress take credit for my genius. They thought I was sitting on a yoga mat in the desert, entirely disconnected from the world. They were about to learn a terrifying lesson about the wrath of a scorned engineer. The morning of the Apex Innovations keynote presentation arrived. Marcus had successfully hacked into the convention center's internal audiovisual network, giving me a live high-definition feed of the massive auditorium. The room was packed to absolute capacity. Thousands of industry leaders, investors, and reporters eagerly waited for the unveiling. Victoria walked onto the brightly lit stage wearing a sharp, tailored white suit, projecting the aura of a visionary tech titan. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. "Welcome to the future of living," Victoria announced, her voice booming through the stadium speakers. For years, the smart home industry has been stagnant. Today, Apex Innovations is proud to introduce a system that doesn't just respond to your commands, but anticipates your humanity. We call it the Pinnacle Protocol. I sat in my dark hotel room, staring at the monitor, my finger hovering delicately over the enter key on my laptop. She was proudly reading the exact marketing copy I had written 6 months ago. Victoria gestured grandly to the massive 60-foot LED screen behind her. "We have constructed a fully functional, glass-walled model home right here on the stage," she explained, pointing to the elaborate set piece. "I am going to initiate a live, real-time demonstration of the Pinnacle Protocol's biometric integration. You will see the home adapt to my physical presence flawlessly." She pulled out a sleek tablet and tapped the screen to initiate the stolen software. The stage lights dimmed, and the interior of the glass model home began to glow with soft, ambient lighting. The crowd leaned forward in silent awe. This was the moment of truth. This was the exact second Julian and Victoria believed they had won the war and secured hundreds of millions in investor capital. I took a deep, steadying breath, felt a cold wave of absolute resolve wash over me, and firmly pressed the enter key. The encrypted remote command shot across the digital ether, striking the hidden payload buried deep within their stolen code. The reaction was instantaneous and violently spectacular. The soft, ambient lighting inside the glass model home abruptly shifted to a blinding, harsh, flashing crimson red. The massive stadium speakers, which were supposed to play soothing, ambient background music, suddenly emitted a deafening, high-pitched screech of digital feedback that caused the front row of the audience to physically flinch and cover their ears. Victoria gasped, frantically tapping the screen of her tablet, her confident smile completely evaporating. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen, a minor networking glitch," she stammered into her microphone, her voice laced with sudden sheer panic. But the system was no longer responding to her inputs. The kill switch had successfully locked out all local administrators. The heavy automated security doors of the glass model home slammed shut and locked with a loud, terrifying clang, trapping Victoria's demonstration actors inside. The flashing red box. The entire auditorium descended into chaotic, confused murmuring. But the light show was just the opening act. The massive 60-foot LED screen behind Victoria violently flickered, the slick Apex Innovations corporate logo melting away into static. The screen went pitch black for 3 agonizing seconds. Then a massive stark white document appeared on the display, magnified for the entire world to see. It was the original highly detailed source code registry, bearing my personal digital signature and the copyright seal of Sentient Spaces, dated nearly a year before Apex claimed to have invented it. A collective gasp rippled through the thousands of tech journalists. Before Victoria could even scream for the AV technicians to cut the feed, the screen shifted again. This time, it displayed high-resolution screenshots of the text messages from Julian's burner phone. The massive screen broadcasted their sordid affair, their explicit confessions of intellectual property theft, and their detailed conspiracy to bankrupt my company. The damning evidence was 60 feet tall and impossible to ignore. Victoria stood frozen on the stage, the color entirely drained from her face, illuminated by the glaring evidence of her massive corporate crimes. The tech journalists in the audience were in an absolute frenzy, their cameras flashing aggressively, capturing the greatest, most spectacular corporate meltdown in Silicon Valley history live on international streams. From my hotel room, I watched Julian sprint out from the VIP wings, his face pale with absolute, suffocating terror. He grabbed Victoria's arm, desperately trying to pull her off the stage, but the damage was already catastrophically irreversible. The investors who had just pledged millions to Apex Innovations were staring at the screen in open-mouthed horror. They realized they had just been lured into a massive, highly illegal fraud scheme. The live stream of the keynote was instantly clipped and shared across every major social media platform, going violently viral in a matter of minutes. The reputation of Apex Innovations was incinerated on live television. I didn't linger to watch the rest of the chaos unfold. I immediately closed my laptop, packed my equipment, and drove straight to the Phoenix airport to board a flight back to San Francisco. While I was in the air, my aggressive corporate litigation team, whom I had placed on standby, filed a massive, highly publicized federal lawsuit against Julian, Victoria, and Apex Innovations. The lawsuit detailed severe corporate espionage, grand larceny, breach of fiduciary duty, and massive intellectual property theft. Because the evidence had been so spectacularly and publicly broadcast to the entire world, a federal judge granted an immediate, emergency injunction freezing every single asset, bank account, and server owned by Apex Innovations. By the time my plane touched down in California, Victoria's company was in absolute administrative ruins, entirely paralyzed by the crushing weight of the federal justice system. When I finally walked through the front doors of the marital home I had shared with Julian, he was already there, frantically throwing expensive clothes into a designer suitcase. He looked like a cornered, terrified animal. The arrogant, smooth-talking lawyer was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, ruined man. When he saw me standing in the doorway, he froze, a look of sheer, unadulterated terror washing over his face. "Eleanor," he choked out, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. You did this. You destroyed the keynote." I walked slowly into the room, my expression a mask of cold, unbreakable stone. "You broke into my life, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You tried to steal the architecture of my mind to impress a woman who builds cheap imitations. I didn't destroy you. I simply showed the world exactly who you are. I let the code speak the truth." Julian fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands, violently sobbing. "Please, Eleanor," he begged pathetically. "Victoria is throwing me under the bus. Her lawyers are claiming I acted alone, that I tricked her into accepting the stolen code. The FBI raided my office an hour ago. I'm facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud and corporate theft. Please, you have to tell them I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man who had tried to systematically destroy my life and steal my legacy. I felt absolutely zero sympathy. You made your choices, Julian, I replied coldly. You signed the fraudulent transfers. You plotted with my rival. You are a brilliant lawyer. You should have read the fine print before you tried to steal from an engineer. Pack your bags and get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. He realized I was completely, utterly unmovable. He grabbed his suitcase and stumbled out into the night, entirely broken. The legal and professional fallout was incredibly swift and absolutely devastating for my enemies. Victoria Vance tried to fiercely deflect the blame, but the undeniable digital trail of the burner phone messages proved her direct, willing complicity in the massive corporate espionage ring. The board of directors at Apex Innovations, terrified of the massive federal liabilities and plummeting stock prices, immediately voted to violently oust her as CEO. She was stripped of her massive corporate equity, disgraced in the international tech community, and formally indicted by federal prosecutors. Her shiny, aggressive empire collapsed into total bankruptcy within 3 short months, entirely dismantled by the massive financial penalties and investor lawsuits. She went from being a celebrated tech titan to a highly toxic radioactive pariah facing a decade behind federal prison bars. Julian's fate was even worse. Victoria's expensive defense team successfully painted him as the predatory mastermind of the heist, completely throwing him to the federal wolves to save her own skin. Stripped of his law license and facing insurmountable evidence of his massive fraud, Julian was forced to accept a harsh, unforgiving plea deal. He was sentenced to 12 years in a minimum security federal penitentiary, ordered to pay millions in massive corporate restitution. The swift, aggressive divorce proceedings left him with absolutely nothing. My lawyers easily secured 100% of my personal assets, the house, and total unassailable control of Sentient Spaces. He walked away from our marriage with a bright orange jumpsuit and a lifetime of crushing debt. He tried to betray a visionary, completely underestimating the cold, terrifying precision of a woman who builds fortresses for a living. With the dark, toxic weight of Julian and Apex Innovations permanently removed from my life, I experienced a massive, unprecedented creative renaissance. The highly public, incredibly dramatic spectacle at the Global Tech Expo didn't hurt my reputation. It transformed me into an absolute industry legend. The world saw the raw, undeniable power of my code and the fierce, unyielding strength of my character. Major venture capital firms, deeply impressed by my brilliant tactical defense of my intellectual property, aggressively lined up to offer me massive, highly lucrative funding rounds. I rebranded the Genesis protocol, cleaned the source code of its dormant payload, and officially launched the system entirely on my own terms. The release was a staggering global success, completely revolutionizing the luxury smart home market and generating hundreds of millions of dollars in highly profitable revenue. I used a fraction of my newly acquired massive wealth to build my own ultimate breathtaking sanctuary. I purchased a sprawling, pristine plot of land overlooking the rugged, beautiful California coastline and designed a magnificent, hypermodern architectural masterpiece. The house was powered entirely by the Genesis protocol, anticipating my every need, surrounding me in a seamless, invisible layer of ultimate comfort and absolute security. I filled my new company with fiercely loyal, brilliant young engineers, creating a highly ethical, incredibly supportive corporate culture that valued true innovation over greedy, toxic corporate rating. I had successfully navigated the darkest, most terrifying betrayal of my life, completely incinerating the parasites who tried to feed off my genius. I emerged from the ashes stronger, sharper, and infinitely more powerful. On a quiet, beautiful Friday evening, I stood on the massive glass balcony of my coastal home, holding a glass of expensive wine, watching the vibrant, fiery sunset slowly melt into the dark Pacific Ocean. The house behind me softly hummed to life, the ambient lighting perfectly adjusting to the fading daylight without me having to lift a single finger. I had trusted the wrong man, and it nearly cost me my entire life's work. But the betrayal didn't break me. It revealed my true, absolute strength. You can forge a legal document, and you can hide behind shell companies, but you can never steal the brilliant, unrelenting fire of the creator. My husband stole my patents to build a kingdom for his mistress, believing I was just a naive, quiet coder who would fade into the background. He learned the hardest, most devastating lesson imaginable. When you try to steal the architecture of a woman's life, You better make sure she didn't hardcode your ultimate destruction directly into the foundation.